Most people spend their entire lives worrying about money, fearing the future, and trying to control what comes next. Yet very few ever find peace through it. Even when there is enough, the mind keeps asking, what if it runs out? What if something goes wrong? What if tomorrow demands more than I can give? Anxiety quietly becomes a companion, following us into sleep, whispering doubts into the dark. Long before modern stress, long before bank accounts and bills and economies, Jesus spoke directly to this restless part of the human heart. Not with complex philosophy, not with harsh commands, but with words so simple they still unsettle us today. He spoke about money, not because money is evil, but because it reveals what we trust. He spoke about worry, not because it is rare, but because it steals life slowly and silently. And he spoke about trust, not as an abstract idea, but as the foundation for real peace. Jesus once looked at a crowd of ordinary people who worried about food and shelter and survival, and he said something radical, something that still feels almost impossible to live by. He said, "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear." These were not wealthy people listening. These were people who lived day to day, people who knew hunger, people who understood loss. And yet Jesus spoke as if worry itself was the real burden, heavier than poverty, heavier than uncertainty. He did not say problems would disappear. He said worry would not help. He asked a quiet question that still echoes through every anxious mind. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? The question lingers because the answer is obvious. Worry adds nothing, yet it consumes everything. Jesus understood that anxiety often feels responsible, as if worrying proves we care, proves we are preparing, proves we are being realistic. But he exposed worry for what it truly is, a habit of carrying tomorrow before it arrives. Anxiety lives in the future, replaying imagined outcomes, rehearsing losses that may never happen. Jesus gently pulled attention back to the present, back to what is real, back to what is held by God. He pointed to the birds of the air and said, "They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them." He was not romanticizing nature. He was revealing trust. The birds wake up each day and live within the provision of the moment. They do not borrow fear from tomorrow. And then Jesus said something that cuts straight through human insecurity. Are you not much more valuable than they? Value is where anxiety begins to loosen its grip. When a person believes they are alone, responsible for everything, anxiety grows. When a person knows they are seen, known, and cared for, worry begins to soften. Jesus spoke of flowers in the fields, clothed in beauty without effort, and said even Solomon in all his wealth was not dressed like one of these. If God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and gone tomorrow, will he not much more clothe you? These words were not meant to dismiss struggle. They were meant to anchor trust. Jesus was saying, if God attends to the small, the temporary, the unnoticed, how much more does he attend to you? Money sits at the center of many fears because it feels like control. It feels like safety. It feels like protection against uncertainty. Jesus did not ignore this. He spoke about money often because he knew it competes for the heart. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This was not poetry. It was diagnosis. What we rely on emotionally will eventually rule us internally. Money promises security, but it demands constant attention. It must be protected, increased, defended. And the more we depend on it for peace, the more anxious we become about losing it. Jesus did not say, money is evil. He said, it is a poor master. He went further and said, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. This was not about religious devotion versus wealth. It was about trust. One will always sit higher in the heart, one will always have the final word. If money is the master, fear will follow closely behind it. Fear of loss, fear of insufficiency, fear of falling behind. Jesus offered an alternative master, not one that demands, but one that provides rest. He spoke of a God who knows what you need before you ask, a God who sees beyond numbers and accounts and future projections. Jesus encountered a man who seemed to have everything: wealth, status, moral discipline, yet the man felt something missing. When Jesus invited him to let go of his possessions and follow him, the man walked away sad. This moment reveals something important. Wealth did not make the man secure. It made him divided. His heart was split between trust in God and trust in what he owned. Anxiety often hides behind abundance. The more we accumulate, the more we fear losing it. Jesus was not asking for poverty. He was exposing attachment. What we cling to most tightly often reveals where our trust truly lies. Jesus told stories about people who built bigger barns, stored more grain, and told themselves they were secure for many years. Yet, life ended unexpectedly. The story was not about punishment. It was about illusion. Control feels solid until it suddenly is not. Jesus was not warning against planning. He was warning against placing confidence in things that cannot hold the weight of the soul. When security is built only on possessions, anxiety is never far away, because nothing material is permanent. Jesus consistently invited people to live one day at a time. He said, "Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." This was not pessimism. It was wisdom. Anxiety collapses time, pulling tomorrow's fears into today's strength. Trust does the opposite. Trust allows today to remain today. It allows the mind to rest where the body already is. Jesus taught people to pray for daily bread, not future guarantees. Daily bread trains daily trust. It keeps the heart from hoarding fear. Throughout his teachings, Jesus spoke of peace, not as the absence of problems, but as the presence of God. He said, "My peace I give you, not as the world gives." The world offers peace when conditions are perfect. Jesus offered peace in the middle of uncertainty. He spoke these words to followers who would face loss, persecution, and uncertainty. Yet he told them not to let their hearts be troubled. Not because life would be easy, but because they would not be alone. When storms came, Jesus did not panic. When the disciples feared drowning, he slept, and when awakened, he spoke to the storm and said, "Peace, be still." The storm obeyed. Then he asked a question that still speaks today: why are you afraid? Fear reveals where trust is thin. Jesus did not shame fear. He challenged it with presence. The same voice that calmed the sea speaks calm into anxious hearts. Trust in the teachings of Jesus is not blind optimism. It is relational confidence. It is knowing who holds tomorrow. It is releasing the burden of control and accepting care instead. Anxiety fades not when every question is answered, but when the heart knows it is safe. Jesus did not promise wealth. He promised rest. He did not promise certainty. He promised faithfulness, and he invited the weary, the burdened, the anxious to come to him and find rest for their souls. This is only the beginning of what Jesus taught about money, anxiety, and trust. And as these words continue to unfold, they are meant not to rush the mind, but to slow it, to ease it, to gently loosen the grip of fear and replace it with something quieter, steadier, and deeper. Jesus knew that fear often disguises itself as wisdom. People tell themselves they worry because they are responsible, because they care, because they are preparing for reality. But Jesus exposed a deeper truth. That worry is often an attempt to carry tomorrow with today's strength. And the human heart was never designed to live that way. When he said, "Do not worry about tomorrow," he was not dismissing tomorrow, he was protecting today. Anxiety pulls the mind forward, away from the present moment where life actually happens, and Jesus continually called people back to now, back to trust, back to God's care in the present. He reminded them that the Father already knows their needs before they speak them aloud, before they even fully understand them themselves. This knowledge changes the nature of prayer. Prayer is no longer a desperate attempt to inform God of a crisis, but a quiet return to dependence. Jesus taught his followers to begin prayer by acknowledging God as Father, not as distant ruler, not as unpredictable judge, but as a caring presence. Trust grows when the heart knows who it is speaking to. Anxiety thrives when God feels far away. Jesus closed that distance. Jesus often addressed small fears that hid behind bigger ones. Fear of not having enough food was really fear of being abandoned. Fear of not having enough money was really fear of being unsafe. Fear of the future was often fear of being alone in it. And Jesus met each of these fears not with statistics or guarantees, but with reassurance of presence. He said, "I am with you." He said, "The Father sees you." He said, "You are worth more than many sparrows." Value dismantles fear. He spoke about money in a way that revealed its limits. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy peace. It can purchase insurance, but not assurance. It can delay fear, but it cannot remove it. Jesus warned that wealth creates an illusion of self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency quietly erodes trust. When people believe they have no need for God, anxiety often increases rather than decreases, because the burden of control becomes total. Everything depends on them. Jesus offered relief from that burden. He spoke of the eye as the lamp of the body, saying if the eye is healthy, the whole body is full of light. But if the eye is unhealthy, the whole body is full of darkness. This teaching was connected to money and anxiety. What we fix our attention on shapes our inner world. If the eye is fixed on lack, fear grows. If the eye is fixed on abundance, gratitude grows. Jesus taught people to shift their focus, not by denying reality, but by seeing reality through trust instead of fear. When Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom of God," he was not offering a religious checklist. He was describing an order of the heart. Whatever is first shapes everything that follows. When money is first, decisions are driven by fear of loss. When God is first, decisions are guided by trust. Jesus promised that when the heart is rightly ordered, needs are met in ways that do not crush the soul. This was not a guarantee of wealth, but a guarantee of care. Jesus encountered people whose anxiety had made them rigid, defensive, and closed off. He also encountered people who had nothing, yet lived with surprising peace. He pointed to a poor widow who gave 2 small coins, everything she had to live on. He said she gave more than all the others, not because of the amount, but because of trust. She did not give out of excess. She gave out of dependence. And Jesus honored that. Generosity, in his teaching, was never about impressing God. It was about expressing trust. Trust is uncomfortable because it requires release. It asks the heart to loosen its grip. Anxiety tightens. Trust opens. When the heart is clenched in fear, peace cannot enter. Jesus offered a different posture, one of openness, humility, and reliance. He told his followers not to store up treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. These were everyday realities for his listeners. They knew loss. They understood decay. Jesus was not warning them about hypothetical dangers. He was reminding them that everything material is temporary. When the heart attaches itself to temporary things, anxiety is inevitable. But when the heart invests in what cannot be taken away, peace becomes possible. Jesus also spoke of giving secretly, not to be seen, not to gain status, but as an act of trust before God. Giving quietly breaks the power of money over the heart. It reminds the soul that provision does not end when generosity begins. This was a radical idea then, and it remains radical now. Anxiety tells us to hold back. Trust invites us to release. When people asked Jesus what must be done to inherit eternal life, he often responded by pointing them away from accumulation and toward love. Love of God. Love of neighbor. Love dissolves fear, because love shifts focus away from self-preservation and toward connection. Anxiety is deeply self-focused, constantly monitoring threats. Love looks outward. Jesus knew that a life centered on love would be less consumed by worry. He reassured his followers that fear of loss should not define them. He said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom." This was not symbolic language meant to sound poetic. It was a declaration of security. If God is willing to give the kingdom, then fear of lacking small things loses its power. When the greatest gift is assured, the smaller fears begin to fade. Jesus also spoke honestly about hardship. He said, "In this world, you will have trouble." He did not pretend otherwise. But he followed that statement with a deeper truth. "Take heart, I have overcome the world." This was not future tense. It was present confidence. Jesus lived from victory, not fear. He invited his followers to do the same. When Jesus invited the weary and burdened to come to him, he was speaking to people exhausted by life, by work, by expectations, by fear. He promised rest, not escape, not wealth, not instant solutions, but rest for the soul. Rest begins when anxiety loosens its grip and trust takes its place. His yoke was easy, his burden light, not because life was simple, but because life was shared. Anxiety isolates. Trust connects. Anxiety convinces people they are alone. Trust reminds them they are held. Jesus consistently dismantled isolation by emphasizing relationship. God as Father, himself as shepherd, followers as a flock. None of these images allow for abandonment. They speak of care, guidance, and presence. As Jesus continued to teach, he revealed that fear often comes from misunderstanding God's character. People who believe God is distant, harsh, or unpredictable will always struggle with trust. Jesus came to reveal the Father as compassionate, attentive, and generous. When people saw him feed the hungry, heal the sick, and welcome the outcast, they were seeing what God is like. Trust grows when God is seen clearly. The teachings of Jesus about money, anxiety, and trust are deeply interconnected. Money reveals trust. Anxiety exposes misplaced trust. Trust restores peace. None of these teachings stand alone. They form a way of life that resists fear and cultivates rest. And as these words continue, they are meant to settle slowly, not as commands to obey, but as truths to absorb. The human heart has not changed since the time of Jesus. People still worry about survival. They still chase security. They still fear loss. And the words of Jesus still speak into these fears with the same quiet authority. inviting the heart to slow down, to release control, and to trust in something deeper than circumstances. Jesus understood that anxiety is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up as constant planning, endless calculating, quiet restlessness, the inability to sit still in peace. He did not condemn this state of mind. He addressed it gently, repeatedly, patiently, knowing that fear is not defeated by force, but by truth. Over and over again, he spoke words meant to slow the racing heart. He said, "Do not be afraid." He said, "Peace be with you." He said, "Why are you troubled?" These were not rhetorical questions. They were invitations to look inward and notice what was driving the fear. When Jesus calmed the storm, he first calmed the people. The waves were real. The danger was real. But he asked his disciples why they were afraid. Fear had already overwhelmed them before the storm overwhelmed the boat. He showed them that peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of trust. The same hands that multiplied bread were capable of steadying chaos. This was not just a miracle on water. It was a lesson about anxiety. When fear takes control, it convinces the heart that God is sleeping. Trust remembers that God is present even when he seems silent. Jesus often contrasted earthly thinking with kingdom thinking. Earthly thinking says, store more, protect more, worry more. Kingdom thinking says, give, trust, rest. He did not say this because he was unaware of hardship, but because he understood the soul. A soul fed by fear never feels full. A soul fed by trust finds satisfaction even in simplicity. Jesus said, "Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." This was not a warning against comfort. It was a warning against confusion. Possessions promise what they cannot deliver. He told a story about a rich man who stored up grain, building bigger barns, saying to himself that he could relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But that very night, his life ended. Jesus did not tell this story to scare people about death. He told it to expose the false sense of security that wealth can create. The man was not condemned for being rich, but for placing his trust in what could not protect him. Anxiety often increases with wealth when trust shifts from God to possessions. Jesus invited his listeners to consider how God provides for creation without anxiety. Birds do not store barns, flowers do not compete for beauty. Yet God cares for them. Jesus was not suggesting irresponsibility. He was challenging obsession. Provision does not require panic. Trust does not eliminate effort. It removes fear from effort. Work done in fear drains the soul. Work done in trust sustains it. He taught that where treasure is, there the heart will be also. Anxiety reveals where the heart is anchored. If the heart is anchored in money, markets, status, or control, anxiety will rise and fall with those things. But if the heart is anchored in God, circumstances lose their power to dominate the inner life. Jesus consistently redirected the heart toward what lasts. Jesus also addressed the fear of scarcity by practicing generosity himself. He fed thousands without asking if there would be enough left. He trusted abundance over scarcity. His actions reinforced his words. When he broke bread, he broke fear. When he shared what was available, it multiplied. This principle echoes throughout his teaching. What is released in trust is often returned in unexpected ways. He warned that no one can serve two masters. Serving money creates tension because money demands loyalty and constant attention. Serving God creates alignment because God offers care rather than control. Jesus understood that anxiety often comes from divided allegiance. When the heart tries to serve both fear and faith, it becomes restless. Peace requires clarity. Trust requires choice. Jesus encountered people burdened by debt, by obligation, by social pressure. He offered forgiveness not only of sin, but of burden. Forgiveness releases the weight of the past. Anxiety often feeds on unresolved guilt and regret. Jesus restored peace by restoring relationship. He did not demand perfection. He offered grace. When he told his followers not to worry about what they would say when brought before authorities, he assured them that the Spirit would give them words. This was trust applied to the future. Anxiety wants control over outcomes. Trust rests in guidance. Jesus taught people to rely on divine wisdom moment by moment rather than trying to predict every possible scenario. He often withdrew to quiet places to pray. This was not escape. It was alignment. Prayer recenters trust. Anxiety pulls outward. Prayer pulls inward. Jesus modeled a rhythm of engagement and retreat. He did not live in constant urgency. He moved with purpose, but without panic. His pace was deliberate. His calm was intentional. Jesus knew that fear often disguises itself as responsibility. People worry because they believe everything depends on them. Jesus dismantled this belief. He reminded people that God is at work beyond their control. Trust acknowledges limits. Anxiety denies them. When people accept their limits, peace becomes possible. He spoke about faith as small as a mustard seed, emphasizing that trust does not need to be large to be effective. Anxiety tells people they need more faith before they can rest. Jesus said, even a little trust can move mountains. This teaching relieved pressure. Trust is not about intensity, it is about direction. Jesus addressed those who were anxious about being seen, accepted, or valued. He told them that God sees what is done in secret. Approval from God quiets the craving for human validation. Anxiety often grows from comparison. Jesus removed comparison by grounding worth in divine love rather than social status. He said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me." This was a direct invitation to shift the center of gravity of the soul. Hearts become troubled when they carry what they were never meant to carry alone. Trust redistributes the weight. Jesus spoke of peace not as something the world gives, but as something He gives. Worldly peace depends on conditions. His peace transcends them. Anxiety thrives on instability. His peace remains steady. This peace does not deny pain. It coexists with it. As His teachings unfold, a pattern becomes clear. Jesus does not ask people to stop caring. He asks them to stop fearing. He does not remove responsibility. He removes panic. He does not promise comfort. He promises presence. Trust grows not because life becomes predictable, but because God becomes reliable. The invitation remains open. To loosen the grip. To slow the breath. To release the illusion of control. To trust that provision does not end when fear ends. To trust that the same God who feeds birds and clothes flowers is attentive to every quiet need. These words are meant to settle slowly, like calm after a storm, reshaping the inner landscape where anxiety once ruled. Jesus never rushed people out of fear. He allowed them to feel it, to recognize it, and then to see beyond it. When He met those who were anxious about survival, He did not shame them for their concern. He reminded them of something deeper than survival, something greater than mere continuation of life. He spoke of abundance not as excess, but as fullness. A life anchored in trust may look simple on the outside, yet be rich on the inside. Anxiety starves the soul even when the body is fed. Trust nourishes the soul even when circumstances are lean. He spoke words that cut through generations, saying, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for his sake will find it." This was not a call to recklessness. It was a revelation about control. The more tightly people grip life, the more fragile it becomes. The more they surrender control, the more life opens. Anxiety clings. Trust releases. This principle echoes in every teaching he gave about money and fear. The one who trusts does not need to dominate outcomes. Jesus understood how deeply fear of the future affects the present. People imagine tomorrow's problems with today's emotions, magnifying stress and draining strength. He spoke directly into this pattern, reminding people that tomorrow has its own concerns. Each day carries enough of its own weight. This teaching was not an excuse for laziness. It was a call to presence. Anxiety steals today by dragging the mind into a future that has not arrived. Trust anchors the soul where grace is available now. He demonstrated trust even in moments of apparent lack. When faced with hungry crowds, he did not dismiss them. He did not panic. He asked what was available. 5 loaves, 2 fish, insignificant by human calculation. Yet he gave thanks first. Gratitude preceded provision. This order matters. Anxiety complains about what is missing. Trust gives thanks for what is present. In his hands the little became enough. The miracle began not with multiplication, but with trust. Jesus also addressed fear of judgment, which often fuels anxiety about success and failure. People worry not only about having enough, but about being enough. He dismantled this fear by redefining value. He welcomed children, the poor, the overlooked. He said the last would be first. He overturned systems that equated worth with achievement. Trust grows when worth is secure. Anxiety thrives when worth feels threatened. He spoke to those who labored endlessly, chasing security through effort alone. He did not condemn work, but he reframed it. He said, "His Father is always working, and he works too. Work done with God feels different than work done for control." Anxiety-driven work is restless and never complete. Trust-driven work has rhythm. Jesus rested. He slept during storms. He withdrew when crowds demanded more. His life modeled balance rooted in trust, not urgency. When he encountered the rich young ruler, he exposed the subtle bond between wealth and anxiety. The man had followed commandments, lived uprightly, yet remained restless. Jesus looked at him with love and invited him to let go of what held his heart captive. The invitation was not about poverty. It was about freedom. The man went away sad, not because he was asked to give up possessions, but because possessions had become his security. Anxiety often hides behind what feels safe. Jesus taught that faithfulness is measured not by accumulation, but by stewardship. He told stories of servants entrusted with resources, not to hoard, but to use. Trust expresses itself through faithful action, not fearful preservation. Anxiety freezes. Trust moves forward. Even risk, when rooted in trust, becomes purposeful rather than paralyzing. He warned against hypocrisy, not only in religion, but in worry. People appear composed while their inner world is chaotic. Jesus addressed the heart. He spoke of peace that flows from within, not from appearances. He knew that anxiety thrives in secrecy. Trust grows in honesty. Bringing fears into the light weakens their power. Jesus often connected forgiveness with peace. Unforgiveness weighs heavily on the soul. It fuels anxiety, resentment, and inner tension. He taught that releasing others releases the self. Forgiveness is an act of trust, trusting that justice does not rest solely in human hands. Anxiety demands repayment. Trust allows release. He promised that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness would be filled. This filling is not material, it is internal. Many people are anxious not because they lack money, but because they lack meaning. Jesus addressed this deeper hunger. Trust satisfies where wealth cannot. Jesus reassured his followers that even their fears were known. He said, "The Father knows how many hairs are on their heads." This was not poetic exaggeration. It was a way of saying nothing about them was overlooked. Anxiety grows when people feel unseen. Trust grows when they feel known. He spoke of the narrow path not as a path of deprivation, but as a path of life. Anxiety often pushes people toward wide paths that promise safety through numbers and conformity. Trust sometimes leads through uncertainty, but always toward life. Jesus walked this path himself. When he faced the cross, he did not deny fear. He acknowledged it. He prayed. He entrusted himself to the Father. Even in suffering, his trust did not collapse. This moment revealed that trust is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let fear have the final word. Anxiety says this is the end. Trust says this is not the end. Jesus' resurrection sealed his teachings with reality. Death itself, the greatest source of human anxiety, was overcome. If death does not have the final word, then fear loses its ultimate leverage. This truth quietly reshapes everything. Money becomes a tool, not a master. Anxiety becomes a signal, not a ruler. Trust becomes a way of life. As these words continue to flow, they are meant to slow the mind and steady the heart. To remind the listener that the teachings of Jesus are not abstract ideals, but lived truths. They speak into sleepless nights, financial strain, uncertain futures, and restless thoughts. They do not demand instant change. They invite gradual release. The invitation is simple, but not shallow. To trust again. To trust deeper. To trust not in outcomes, but in care. To trust not because circumstances are stable, but because God is faithful. To trust even when answers are delayed. To trust even when fear whispers loudly. Trust grows quietly, like roots beneath the surface, unseen but strong, and as the soul rests in these teachings, anxiety begins to loosen its grip, not through force, but through truth, presence, and peace that does not depend on what tomorrow brings. Jesus never presented trust as a feeling that appears suddenly and stays forever. He spoke of it as a posture, a direction of the heart that must be chosen again and again. Trust, in his teaching, was not passive. It was active reliance. It was waking up each day and deciding where the weight of the soul would rest. Anxiety shifts that weight onto the self. Trust places it back onto God. This daily movement is subtle, often unnoticed, yet it reshapes a life over time. He spoke to people who lived under constant pressure, political pressure, economic pressure, religious pressure. Their lives were not calm or predictable. Yet he spoke to them about peace as something available now, not later. Peace was not postponed until circumstances improved. It was offered in the middle of instability. This alone challenged everything people believed about security. Jesus taught that peace is not found by arranging life perfectly, but by trusting God deeply. When he healed people, he often said, "Your faith has made you well." This was not magic language. It was recognition that trust opens the door for restoration. Anxiety closes that door by convincing the heart that nothing can change. Trust does not guarantee outcomes, but it creates openness. Jesus consistently honored openness. Those who came to him honest, vulnerable, and trusting found rest. Jesus also warned about the anxiety of appearances. He spoke of those who prayed loudly, gave publicly, and fasted visibly. Their anxiety was rooted in being seen and approved. He offered a quieter way, a way where God sees in secret. When approval comes from God, the fear of human judgment loses power. This inner freedom calms the restless striving that exhausts the soul. He taught his followers to ask for daily bread, not weekly bread, not stored bread, daily bread. This prayer trains the heart to live one day at a time. Anxiety wants guarantees. Trust lives on provision. Each day becomes sufficient when trust replaces fear. This does not deny planning. It prevents obsession. Jesus often used paradox to dismantle anxious thinking. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who give will receive. Those who lose will find. These statements disrupt logic driven by fear. Anxiety says, protect yourself at all costs. Jesus says, surrender leads to life. Trust redefines success. He acknowledged that riches can choke the word, not because wealth is evil, but because it competes for trust. Anything that competes for trust becomes a source of anxiety. The heart can only rest in one place. Jesus called people to choose wisely where that rest would be. Jesus spoke of joy as something complete, not partial. Joy is different from happiness. Happiness depends on events. Joy flows from trust. Anxiety erodes joy because it constantly anticipates loss. Trust allows joy to exist even alongside uncertainty. This is why Jesus could speak of joy in the same breath as sacrifice. He reassured his followers that they were never alone in their worries. He promised the presence of the Spirit, a helper, a comforter. Anxiety isolates the mind. Presence reconnects it. The Spirit was not promised to remove difficulty, but to provide strength within it. Trust deepens when presence is felt. Jesus reminded people that even faith itself is a gift. This removed pressure. Trust is not manufactured by effort alone. It grows through relationship. Spending time in His words, His presence, His way, gradually reshapes the inner world. Anxiety weakens as trust strengthens. He also warned against judging others, knowing that judgment fuels anxiety by fostering comparison. When people measure themselves against others, peace disappears. Jesus freed people from this cycle by grounding identity in God's love rather than performance. Trust stabilizes identity. Jesus spoke of light overcoming darkness. Darkness often represents fear, confusion, uncertainty. Light reveals reality as it truly is. Anxiety thrives in darkness, where imagined threats multiply. Trust brings light, clarity, and perspective. Even when answers are incomplete, light is enough to move forward. He encouraged people to remain in Him, like branches connected to a vine. This image speaks of dependence without anxiety. Branches do not strain to produce fruit. They remain connected. Fruit comes naturally. Anxiety strains. Trust remains. Jesus promised that those who remain in Him would bear much fruit. This fruit includes peace, patience, gentleness. Anxiety produces the opposite. Trust transforms character from the inside out. This transformation is gradual, not forced. He spoke honestly about persecution and difficulty, yet told His followers not to fear those who could harm the body. He pointed beyond temporary threats to eternal security. When the ultimate future is secure, present fears lose their dominance. Trust widens perspective. Jesus understood grief. He wept. He felt loss. Trust does not eliminate sorrow. It carries sorrow without being destroyed by it. Anxiety resists pain. Trust allows pain while holding hope. This distinction matters deeply. As these teachings continue to echo, they are meant to be absorbed slowly, like steady rain soaking into dry ground. Anxiety often demands immediate relief. Trust grows quietly, beneath awareness. Over time, what once triggered fear begins to lose its hold. The teachings of Jesus about money, anxiety, and trust are not separate lessons. They form a single invitation to live with open hands, to breathe without panic, to work without fear, to give without dread, to rest without guilt, to trust without conditions. And this trust does not rest on optimism. It rests on character, on the faithfulness of God revealed through Jesus, on a love that does not fluctuate with circumstances, on a presence that remains even when answers do not come quickly. As the words continue, they invite the heart to settle deeper, to release one more layer of tension, to let go of one more imagined burden, to remember that life is not sustained by worry, nor secured by wealth, but held by care that does not sleep, does not forget, and does not fail. Jesus never asked people to pretend they were not afraid. He invited them to bring fear into the open, where it could be transformed. Fear loses power when it is named. Anxiety weakens when it is understood. Jesus spoke directly to the heart, because he knew that lasting peace is not achieved by changing circumstances alone, but by changing what the heart trusts. He spoke words that were meant to be remembered in moments of pressure, words that return quietly when the mind is overwhelmed. He spoke of watchfulness, not as anxious vigilance, but as attentive living. Anxiety watches for threats. Trust watches for God. These are very different ways of paying attention. Anxiety scans the horizon for danger. Trust remains aware of presence. Jesus taught people to live awake, not tense, awake to goodness, awake to provision, awake to the nearness of God. He addressed the fear of scarcity again and again because it is one of the oldest human fears. From the beginning, people have worried about having enough food, enough safety, enough time, enough worth. Jesus countered this fear by revealing a God who gives generously, not reluctantly. He spoke of a father who gives good gifts to his children, not stones when they ask for bread. This image alone dismantles many anxious assumptions about God. Jesus knew that anxiety often grows when people feel they must earn God's care. He removed this burden by emphasizing grace. Care is given, not earned. Trust grows when love is received freely. Anxiety thrives when love feels conditional. Jesus restored peace by restoring confidence in God's character. He spoke of repentance, not as punishment, but as turning. Turning away from fear. Turning away from false securities. Turning toward trust. This turning is gentle but decisive. It is the moment the heart chooses to believe something new about God, about life, about itself. Jesus also spoke about the anxiety of waiting. Waiting exposes fear because it removes control. He encouraged patience, not as passive resignation, but as hopeful endurance. He used images of seeds growing unseen, reminding people that much of God's work happens beneath the surface. Anxiety demands immediate results. Trust allows time. He warned that the cares of this world can choke what God is growing within. Cares are not always dramatic. They are often subtle. Daily worries, repeated concerns, small fears that accumulate. Jesus called people to guard their hearts, not by hardening them, but by anchoring them in trust. Jesus consistently redirected attention from what people lacked to what they had. He noticed the widow's coins. He noticed the child's lunch. He noticed faith where others saw insignificance. Trust sees possibility. Anxiety sees limitation. Jesus trained his followers to see differently. He spoke of faith moving mountains, not to glorify faith itself, but to reveal the power of trust placed rightly. Mountains represent obstacles that feel immovable. Anxiety magnifies them. Trust reframes them. Even when mountains remain, trust changes how people stand before them. Jesus did not separate spiritual life from practical life. His teachings about trust applied to money, relationships, work, health, and the future. He knew that anxiety does not stay in one category, it spreads. Trust also spreads. When trust takes root in one area, it influences the rest. He taught that the greatest commandments were love of God and love of neighbor. Love and anxiety cannot coexist fully. Love requires openness. Anxiety resists it. Trust enables love by reducing fear. When fear decreases, love increases naturally. Jesus spoke about freedom often. Freedom from fear, freedom from guilt, freedom from striving. He said the truth would set people free. Truth dismantles anxious lies. Lies whisper that God is absent. Truth declares He is near. Lies say you are alone. Truth says you are seen. He spoke about being children of God, not servants driven by fear. Children trust instinctively. They rely. They ask. They rest. Jesus invited adults back into this posture, not childishness, but childlike trust. Anxiety grows when people believe they must face everything alone. Trust remembers belonging. Jesus also addressed the fear of the unknown. He spoke of preparing wisely, but trusting deeply. He did not give detailed roadmaps for every future decision. He gave principles, presence, and peace. Trust does not need full visibility. It needs direction. When he said, "Follow me," he was not offering certainty. He was offering companionship. Anxiety often comes from walking alone. Trust grows in relationship. Following Jesus meant walking with him into uncertainty without being abandoned in it. He promised rest, not just sleep, but rest for the soul. Soul rest is deeper than physical rest. It quiets the inner noise. It settles the constant evaluation. It releases the need to prove worth. Anxiety exhausts the soul. Trust restores it. Jesus understood that fear often returns. He did not expect trust to eliminate anxiety permanently. He taught people how to return to trust again and again. This return is not failure. It is practice. Each return strengthens the heart. As these teachings continue to unfold, they gently invite the listener to notice their own inner patterns. Where worry arises, where fear tightens, where control feels necessary. And then, without force, to imagine placing those concerns into hands stronger than their own. The words of Jesus do not rush this process. They remain patient. They wait. They accompany. They reassure. They do not demand instant peace. They cultivate lasting peace. And in this slow, steady rhythm, anxiety begins to lose its authority. Not because life becomes easy, but because trust becomes deeper. Not because problems disappear, but because fear no longer dominates. Trust grows quietly, faithfully, carrying the soul forward, one breath, one day, one moment at a time. Jesus knew that the human heart often lives divided between hope and fear. One part longs to trust, while another clings tightly to control. He did not condemn this tension. He addressed it with patience, understanding that trust is learned through experience, not demanded through force. Every encounter he had was an invitation to shift weight from fear to faith, from anxiety to assurance. He spoke about the kingdom of God not as a distant future only, but as a present reality. When people are anxious, they often live either in the past, replaying regrets, or in the future, anticipating threats. Jesus consistently pulled them back into the present, where the kingdom was already near. Presence dissolves anxiety. Trust anchors the mind in what is happening now rather than what might happen later. Jesus understood that many worries are inherited. Fear passes from generation to generation. Anxiety becomes normalized. He challenged inherited fear by revealing a different way of seeing God, not as harsh taskmaster, but as loving Father. When people's image of God changes, their inner world changes with it. Trust grows when God is no longer feared as unpredictable. He spoke of the narrow gate again, not to restrict joy, but to protect it. Anxiety often promises safety by offering many options, many backups, many contingencies. Trust chooses a simpler path. Simplicity quiets the soul. Jesus lived simply, not because he lacked opportunity, but because simplicity kept his heart free. Jesus addressed the anxiety of loss by redefining gain. He taught that storing treasures in heaven secures what cannot be stolen. This was not escapism. It was realism. Everything visible is temporary. Anxiety arises when people expect permanence from what cannot provide it. Trust accepts impermanence without despair. He reminded his followers that suffering does not indicate abandonment. Many anxious thoughts begin with the assumption that difficulty means God has withdrawn. Jesus contradicted this by walking with people through suffering. He did not remove himself from pain. He entered it. Trust deepens when presence remains even in hardship. Jesus often spoke in parables because truth settles differently when discovered rather than forced. Anxiety resists commands. Trust responds to insight. As people recognized themselves in his stories, fear loosened its grip. They saw alternatives to worry. They imagined different ways of living. He addressed the anxiety of comparison by emphasizing unique calling. No two lives are the same. Anxiety grows when people measure their progress against others. Jesus redirected focus inward toward faithfulness rather than competition. Trust grows when the heart knows its own path. He spoke of abiding, remaining, staying connected. Anxiety pushes people to run. Trust invites them to stay. Staying does not mean stagnation. It means rootedness. Roots give stability during storms. Jesus knew storms would come. He prepared people by strengthening roots, not by promising calm weather. Jesus reassured his followers that even their mistakes could be redeemed. Anxiety often fixates on failure. Trust believes in restoration. He restored Peter after denial. He welcomed Thomas after doubt. He did not shame uncertainty. He transformed it. He taught that peace is learned. It is practiced. It grows through repetition. Each time a person chooses trust over worry, even slightly, peace deepens. Anxiety loses power gradually. This process is gentle, patient, and forgiving. Jesus spoke of joy being made complete. Joy completes trust. Anxiety fragments it. When joy is rooted in God rather than circumstances, it remains steady. Jesus did not live a joyless life. His joy was resilient, grounded, and contagious. He spoke of endurance, of remaining faithful through difficulty. Anxiety seeks escape. Trust seeks strength. Jesus offered strength. Strength to endure uncertainty. Strength to love when afraid. Strength to give when resources feel scarce. He reminded people that they mattered deeply, that their lives were not accidents, that their fears were not ignored, that their needs were known. Anxiety often whispers that one is forgotten. Trust answers with belonging. He told his followers that the Spirit would remind them of his words. These teachings were meant to return in moments of stress, when money feels tight, when the future feels unclear, when fear rises at night. Trust grows as these words resurface, gently correcting anxious thoughts. Jesus never promised a life without trouble. He promised a life not ruled by fear. This distinction matters. Anxiety seeks control. Trust seeks relationship. Relationship sustains when control fails. As these reflections continue, they are meant to create space. Space to breathe. Space to release tension. Space to consider where trust has been replaced by fear. And without pressure, to imagine returning again. The words of Jesus remain steady. They do not fade with time. They do not lose relevance. They speak across generations because anxiety remains human and trust remains necessary. His teachings are not outdated solutions to modern problems. They are timeless truths for restless hearts. And as the soul rests in this rhythm, slowly, quietly, without force, trust takes deeper root. Fear loosens its grip. Anxiety softens. And peace, not as an emotion but as a presence, begins to settle in, carrying the heart forward into whatever tomorrow holds, without panic, without haste, without fear. Jesus understood that many fears are not dramatic but ordinary. Fear of not measuring up, fear of disappointing others, fear of falling behind, fear of being left out. These quiet anxieties shape daily decisions more than people realize. He addressed them not by offering comparison or competition, but by grounding identity in love. He reminded people that they were already seen, already known, already valued. Trust grows when identity is settled. Anxiety thrives when identity feels threatened. He spoke of humility as strength, not weakness. Anxiety often hides behind pride, behind the need to appear capable, self-sufficient, in control. Humility releases that burden. To admit need is not failure. It is honesty. Jesus lived humbly, dependent on the Father, showing that reliance is not shameful. Trust flourishes in humility because it allows help to be received. Jesus addressed the fear of rejection by welcoming those who had been pushed aside. He touched the untouchable. He ate with those others avoided. He listened to those ignored. His actions revealed that God's acceptance is not fragile. Anxiety often comes from conditional acceptance. Trust rests in unconditional love. He spoke of obedience, not as rigid rule-following, but as alignment with truth. Anxiety resists obedience because it fears loss. Trust embraces obedience because it trusts the outcome. Jesus obeyed even when the path was difficult, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he trusted the Father's will. He taught that wisdom begins with reverence, not fear. Reverence acknowledges God's greatness without shrinking the self. Anxiety shrinks the self. Trust expands it. When people understand their place in relation to God, fear loosens its grip. Jesus often spoke about letting go of anger, letting go of resentment, letting go of fear, letting go of possessions, letting go of control. Letting go is frightening because it feels like loss. Jesus reframed it as gain. What is released in trust is not lost, it is transformed. He spoke of the cost of following him, not to intimidate, but to clarify. Anxiety thrives on vague fear. Clarity reduces fear. Jesus was honest about difficulty so that trust would not be based on illusion. Trust grounded in truth is resilient. He reassured his followers that even when they felt weak, they were not abandoned. Weakness does not disqualify trust. It deepens it. Anxiety often appears strongest when people feel weakest. Jesus met people in weakness, not after they overcame it. He spoke of patience as active waiting. Waiting does not mean nothing is happening. Anxiety equates waiting with stagnation. Trust recognizes growth beneath the surface. Seeds grow in darkness. Roots deepen unseen. Jesus invited people to trust the process. He spoke of forgiveness repeatedly because unforgiven wounds keep the soul tense. Anxiety often hides unresolved pain. Forgiveness releases what anxiety clings to. Jesus did not minimize hurt. He transformed it through grace. Jesus knew that fear often resurfaces at night, when distractions fade and thoughts grow louder. His words were meant to return in those quiet hours. Do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Trust in God. These phrases are anchors, steadying the mind when it drifts. He spoke of being salt and light, not to pressure people to perform, but to remind them that their presence mattered. Anxiety convinces people they are insignificant. Trust affirms purpose. Even small acts done in trust carry meaning. He addressed the fear of the unknown future by emphasizing faithfulness in the present. Today has enough grace for today. Anxiety borrows trouble from tomorrow. Trust receives grace moment by moment. Jesus never hurried people into trust. He allowed space. He allowed questions. He allowed doubt. He responded with patience. Trust grows best in safety, not pressure. His gentleness dismantled fear more effectively than force ever could. He spoke of hope not as wishful thinking, but as confident expectation rooted in God's character. Anxiety expects loss. Hope expects goodness, even if it arrives differently than imagined. Trust aligns with hope. He reminded his followers that God's care extends beyond human understanding, that even when answers are delayed, care is not absent. Anxiety measures care by outcomes. Trust measures care by presence. Jesus lived what he taught. His calm was not accidental. His peace was not circumstantial. It flowed from trust. This consistency gave his words authority. He did not speak from theory. He spoke from relationship. As these teachings continue to settle, they invite the listener to notice subtle shifts. Breathing slowing, thoughts softening, the body releasing tension. This is not coincidence. Trust affects the whole person. Anxiety resides not only in the mind, but in the body. Peace restores both. The words of Jesus are not meant to overwhelm, they are meant to accompany, to walk beside the listener through uncertainty, to offer steady presence when fear threatens to take over, to remind the heart that it is not alone, not forgotten, not unsupported. And so the invitation remains open, moment by moment, to trust again, to release again, to breathe again, to rest again, to remember that life is held by care deeper than worry, stronger than fear, and faithful beyond measure. Jesus understood that trust is cultivated over time, not forced instantly. He likened it to planting seeds, tending vineyards, walking patiently alongside growth. Anxiety seeks shortcuts, solutions that provide immediate relief. Trust waits, nurtures, and gradually strengthens. He illustrated this in countless interactions, teaching, feeding, healing, and comforting. Not as isolated events, but as ongoing demonstrations of God's care. Each act was an example that faithfulness produces reliability, and reliability produces calm. He knew that fear is often tied to uncertainty about identity. Who am I? Am I enough? Will I be cared for? Anxiety magnifies these questions endlessly. Jesus answered them not by giving abstract answers, but by offering himself as a living proof, loved, seen, chosen, and secure. Trust is grounded in reality, not mere words, and seeing him live these truths gave credibility to his teachings. He addressed the anxiety of planning for the future by emphasizing priorities. Worry over tomorrow often distracts people from what is meaningful today. Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added." This principle shifts focus from scarcity to sufficiency, from fear to alignment. He reframed priorities to place care, relationship, and purpose above endless striving for security. Jesus also highlighted the importance of perspective. He compared human worry to watching birds or considering lilies, observing how creation is provided for without the panic that humans feel. These examples were not naive. They were practical illustrations of a principle that applies universally. The world is ordered, and provision is not absent even when it seems uncertain. Trust emerges when perspective is aligned with truth rather than fear-driven assumption. He spoke frequently of obedience as liberation, not restriction. Anxiety often arises from attempting to control outcomes, from acting in ways that manipulate circumstances to feel safe. Jesus proposed a different model. Aligning with God's will allows life to move without the oppressive weight of self-directed control. Trust is choosing alignment over manipulation, freedom over compulsion. He addressed the quiet forms of worry that infect relationships, mistrust, suspicion, and overcriticism. Anxiety leads people to demand guarantees from others, to project fears outward. Jesus modeled openness, patience, and acceptance, showing that healthy trust strengthens bonds rather than frays them. When the heart trusts God, it can also extend trust to others without collapse. Jesus consistently pointed to eternal truths to calm temporal fears. Death, loss, betrayal, poverty. These are temporary, he taught. Yet the promises of God, his care, his presence, his kingdom are permanent. When the mind grasps permanence beneath impermanence, fear loses its grip. Trust stabilizes the soul amid life's inevitable fluctuations. He invited followers to bring burdens to him, not only as a spiritual exercise, but as a practical method of releasing tension. Anxiety thrives on carrying weight alone. Jesus suggested handing the weight over, trusting it to a source capable of holding it perfectly. The act of release itself is transformative. Each time a burden is shared in trust, freedom grows. He emphasized gratitude as an antidote to fear. Even when circumstances are difficult, focusing on what is present, what has been provided, what is reliable, shifts the heart. Gratitude rewires perception. It diminishes anxiety's amplification of threat. Jesus modeled gratitude consistently, giving thanks before feeding the multitudes, blessing daily bread, praising God in prayer. Trust and gratitude are intertwined. One reinforces the other. Jesus addressed the anxiety of failure by reframing success. He measured it not in accumulation, achievement, or appearance, but in faithfulness, love, and integrity. Anxiety obsesses over outcomes. Trust emphasizes process. Success becomes living in alignment with truth, not meeting external benchmarks. This reframing transforms the inner landscape from tension to calm. He spoke of hope that is active, not passive. Hope acts even when certainty is absent. Anxiety immobilizes, convinced that acting without guarantees is dangerous. Trust acts, guided by the principle that God's care provides sufficient direction. Every small, faithful step reduces anxiety incrementally, teaching the heart through experience that trust is reliable. Jesus never denied the reality of suffering, but he reframed its meaning. Pain is inevitable, he said, but it does not signify abandonment. Trials refine trust. Difficulties demonstrate the constancy of God's presence. Anxiety interprets suffering as threat. Trust interprets suffering as context for reliance. This reframing empowers resilience. He repeatedly contrasted the weight of worry with the lightness of faith. Anxiety burdens, compresses, exhausts. Trust releases, expands, restores. He described his yoke as easy, his burden as light, not by minimizing life's demands, but by offering partnership in carrying them. True relief is found not in avoidance but in shared burden. Jesus' teachings demonstrate that trust is not naive optimism, but disciplined awareness of God's faithfulness. Anxiety magnifies uncertainty. Trust aligns perception with reality. The teachings are designed to be integrated: daily practice, reflective attention, honest acknowledgement of fear, intentional release into God's care. Over time, this transforms a life from reactive fear to responsive peace. As these lessons flow, they invite the listener to engage continuously, to notice anxious impulses, to name them, to observe their transient nature, and to redirect the mind and heart toward trust. Each repeated moment of return strengthens neural and spiritual pathways of reliance, gradually replacing the reflexive grasp of fear with the steady embrace of trust. Jesus' life itself embodies these teachings: calm in storms, generous amid scarcity, patient amid misunderstanding, loving amid rejection. Every word he spoke was supported by action. His presence is an enduring invitation to practice trust, to observe it in the flesh, to internalize it into one's own life. The rhythm of his teachings carries the heart slowly, persistently, toward peace. Not a temporary relief, not a fleeting emotion, but a foundational trust that anchors the soul in the midst of uncertainty, providing rest for the weary, courage for the anxious, and guidance for the seeking. Jesus' message about money, anxiety, and trust always came back to one simple, profound principle: the heart follows what it treasures, and worry follows what it clings to. He reminded people that true security does not come from wealth, success, or control. It comes from a God who sees, knows, and provides. Anxiety arises when people try to hold on to what was never meant to be held alone. Trust releases the burden, not by making life easier, but by giving the soul a steady anchor amid life's storms. He taught that each day is enough, that care is constant even when provision seems uncertain, and that small acts of faith, prayer, gratitude, generosity, obedience, build an inner stability that fear cannot shake. Trust is not a single choice. It is a practice, a rhythm, a way of living that reshapes every aspect of life. Even when circumstances are difficult, even when loss occurs, even when the future is unknown, the heart that trusts finds peace. The life of Jesus itself is the ultimate example. He walked with absolute trust in the Father, giving, forgiving, healing, and loving without panic or fear. In his presence, the anxious are calmed, the burdened are lightened, and the soul is reminded of its true worth. His teachings invite everyone to live in the same way, anchored in God, attentive to the present, generous with what they have, and free from the tyranny of fear. In the end, the peak of Jesus' teaching is simple, yet transformative. Let go of what you cannot control, trust in what is faithful, and align your heart with what endures. Money, worry, and uncertainty are no longer masters. They are tools, challenges, and moments to practice faith. When trust becomes the center of life, anxiety loses its grip, joy deepens, and peace settles in the soul in a way that nothing else can provide. This is the enduring invitation to live with open hands, open hearts, and steady faith. To trust not because life is guaranteed to be easy, but because God is always faithful. To rest not in the absence of storms, but in the presence of a Savior who walks through them with you. And in this trust, the soul discovers a freedom, a calm, and a richness that no worldly gain can match. A peace that carries the heart through every tomorrow. This is where Jesus leaves the listener, not with abstract advice, not with temporary relief, but with a lasting anchor for the heart. Trust, rooted in God's presence, transforms anxiety into calm, scarcity into sufficiency, and fear into faith. And so, the soul can breathe, the mind can rest, and the heart can finally know the profound relief of being held, fully and completely, by love that never fails.